1950s in America was a decade of post-war prosperity, social conformity, and rapid technological advancement. These broader societal trends significantly influenced how Americans experienced and perceived the winter season. As we explore winter in 1950s America, we'll uncover not just the activities and traditions that define the season, but also the underlying social, cultural, and economic factors that shaped the winter experience during this pivotal decade. Winter fashion in the 1950s was characterized by a blend of functionality and elegance. Women's winter coats often featured fur collars and cuffs, reflecting the era's emphasis on glamour even in cold weather gear. Men typically wore heavy wool overcoats and fedoras. This attention to style, even in winter wear, mirrored the decade's overall focus on appearance and conformity to social norms. The 1950s saw a boom in winter sports participation, particularly skiing. The post-war economic prosperity allowed more Americans to afford ski equipment and vacations to ski resorts. This growth in winter recreation reflected the era's increased leisure time and disposable income, as well as a growing emphasis on outdoor activities as a form of family bonding. Winter home heating in the 1950s was undergoing significant changes. While many homes still relied on coal furnaces, the decade saw a rapid shift towards oil and natural gas heating systems. This transition reflected the broader modernization of American homes and the increasing availability of new energy sources. The winter holiday season in 1950s, America was a time of elaborate decorations and community celebrations. Department store window displays became increasingly elaborate, drawing crowds of spectators. These displays not only celebrated the season, but also promoted consumerism, a defining characteristic of 1950s American culture. Winter driving in the 1950s presented significant challenges. Many roads were not as well maintained as they are today, and snow tires were not yet common. Drivers often used chains on their tires for better traction. These difficulties in winter transportation highlight the era's ongoing struggle to adapt infrastructure to the demands of a rapidly motorizing society. School snow days in the 1950s were less common than in later decades. Many children were expected to brave the elements to attend school, often walking long distances. This approach reflected the era's emphasis on resilience and the expectation that daily routines should continue despite weather challenges. Winter entertainment in the 1950s was often centered around the home. Families gathered around radios and the newly popular television sets to enjoy programs together. Board games and card games were popular evening activities. This focus on home-based entertainment reflected the strong emphasis on family life characteristic of the 1950s. Ice skating was a beloved winter activity in 1950s America. Many communities maintained outdoor ice rinks, which became social hubs during the winter months. The popularity of ice skating aligned with the decade's emphasis on wholesome, family-friendly activities and community engagement. The 1950s saw advancements in weather forecasting, though it was still far less accurate than today. Many Americans relied on radio broadcasts and newspapers for weather information. The limitations of weather prediction often led to a sense of excitement and unpredictability around winter storms. Winter cuisine in the 1950s featured hearty, warming dishes. Casseroles, stews, and pot roasts were popular choices for family dinners. The era also saw the rise of convenience foods, with canned and frozen vegetables becoming staples in winter meals. This culinary trend reflected both traditional comfort food preferences and the growing influence of food technology and marketing. Children's winter activities in the 1950s often centered around outdoor play. Sledding, building snowmen, and snowball fights were popular pastimes. Parents generally allowed children more unsupervised outdoor time than in later decades, reflecting different attitudes towards child safety and independence. The Christmas season in 1950s, America was marked by a strong emphasis on traditional religious observances alongside growing commercialization. Church attendance was high, and nativity scenes were common in public spaces. Simultaneously, the giving of store-bought gifts became increasingly important, reflecting the era's prosperity and consumerist tendencies. Winter work life in the 1950s was less affected by weather than in previous decades, thanks to improved heating systems in offices and factories. However, certain professions like construction still faced significant seasonal challenges. This dichotomy highlighted the uneven pace of modernization across different sectors of the economy. The advent of central heating in many homes changed the way Americans experienced winter indoors. Families could now heat entire houses rather than clustering around a single heat source. This technological advancement contributed to changes in family dynamics and the use of home spaces during winter months. Winter tourism began to flourish in the 1950s, with improvements in transportation making winter vacations more accessible to the middle class. Destinations like Florida and California became popular for those seeking to escape the cold. This trend reflected the increasing mobility of American society and the growing concept of vacation as a middle-class right. The winter landscape of 1950s suburbia was characterized by rows of similar houses, with smoke curling from chimneys and cars in driveways. This iconic image of winter in the suburbs encapsulated the era's focus on uniformity, domesticity, and the American dream. Winter sports at the professional level gained popularity in the 1950s. Ice hockey, in particular, saw growth in fan base and media coverage. The increasing popularity of winter sports broadcasts provided entertainment during the cold months and contributed to a shared national experience of winter. The threat of nuclear war cast a subtle shadow over 1950s winters. Civil defense preparations, including fallout shelter stocking, were often conducted with an eye towards surviving a potentially harsh post-apocalyptic winter. This underlying anxiety was a unique aspect of winter preparedness during the Cold War era. Winter fashion for children in the 1950s often prioritized conformity over practicality. Girls might wear dresses with leggings for warmth, while boys wore trousers and sweaters. The emphasis on maintaining a neat appearance even in harsh weather reflected the decade's overall focus on respectability and social norms. The 1950s saw the popularization of winter-themed music, with songs like "Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow," and "Winter Wonderland" becoming standards. These cheerful depictions of winter in popular culture contributed to a romanticized view of the season. Snow removal in cities became more efficient in the 1950s with the widespread use of motorized plows. However, the practice of simply piling snow along roadsides often created hazardous conditions for pedestrians and motorists alike. This situation highlighted the ongoing challenges of urban winter management. Winter health concerns in the 1950s centered around common colds and influenza. The era saw increased use of antibiotics, often prescribed unnecessarily for viral infections. This medical approach reflected both advancements in pharmaceutical science and misconceptions about disease treatment. The winter of 1950 to 1951 was particularly severe in many parts of the United States, with record-breaking snowfalls and cold temperatures. Such extreme weather events often became part of local lore, shaping perceptions of winter hardiness among the generation that experienced them. Winter clothing production in the 1950s benefited from advancements in synthetic materials. Fabrics like nylon and polyester began to be incorporated into winter wear, offering new options for warmth and water resistance. This trend was part of the broader integration of new technologies into everyday life. School winter activities in the 1950s often included events like winter carnivals and ice skating parties. These activities fostered a sense of community and provided structured social opportunities for young people, aligning with the era's emphasis on organized, wholesome fun. The role of radio during winter months was crucial in the 1950s, especially for weather and school closure announcements. Families would gather around the radio for these important updates, a practice that reinforced the centrality of radio in home life despite the growing popularity of television. Winter car maintenance in the 1950s was a significant concern for many Americans. Motorists had to be vigilant about using anti-freeze and keeping batteries charged in cold weather. This attention to winter car care reflected the increasing importance of automobiles in daily life. The aesthetic of winter in 1950s advertising and media often portrayed an idealized version of the season. Images of rosy-cheeked children playing in the snow and families enjoying winter activities were common, contributing to a nostalgic view of winter that persists in American culture. Winter brought unique challenges to rural America in the 1950s. Farmers had to ensure livestock were protected from the cold, and rural roads were often the last to be cleared of snow. These challenges highlighted the ongoing disparities between urban and rural life in post-war America. The 1950s saw the rise of indoor shopping centers, which provided a climate-controlled environment for winter shopping. This development changed the nature of the winter shopping experience and foreshadowed the dominance of indoor malls in American consumer culture. Winter energy consumption in the 1950s was less of a concern than it would become in later decades. Cheap and abundant fossil fuels meant that many Americans could heat their homes liberally without worrying about high costs or environmental impact. This carefree attitude towards energy use reflected the era's overall sense of abundance and progress. Winter sports equipment saw significant improvements in the 1950s. Advances in materials and design made skis, ice skates, and other winter gear more accessible and user-friendly. These improvements contributed to the growing popularity of winter sports among the middle class. The concept of the winter wonderland was heavily promoted in 1950s popular culture, from movies to advertising. This idealized vision of winter-shaped expectations and attitudes towards the season, sometimes creating a disconnect between the marketed image and the reality of winter challenges. Winter safety practices in the 1950s were less developed than they are today. For example, seat belts were not standard in cars, making winter driving particularly dangerous. This lack of safety measures was indicative of the era's different approach to risk and personal responsibility. The winter social season in 1950s, America was marked by formal dances, charity events, and holiday parties. These events were important for networking and maintaining social status, reflecting the era's emphasis on community involvement and social conformity. Winter reading habits in the 1950s were influenced by the popularity of book clubs and the rise of paperback books. Long winter evenings provided ample time for reading, and many families had home libraries. This focus on reading reflected the era's valuation of self-improvement and cultural literacy. The winter landscape of 1950s cities was often marked by coal smoke from heating systems, creating a hazy atmosphere. This visible air pollution was accepted as a normal part of urban winter life, highlighting different environmental attitudes compared to later decades. Winter fashion accessories in the 1950s included items like earmuffs, hand muffs, and fur-lined gloves. These accessories often served as status symbols as well as practical winter gear, reflecting the era's attention to social status even in functional winter wear. The practice of sending Christmas cards reached its peak in the 1950s, with many families sending and receiving dozens of cards each year. This tradition reflected the importance of social connections and the strength of community ties in 1950s America. As we reflect on winter in 1950s America, we see a season shaped by the decade's unique blend of tradition and modernity. The post-war economic boom, technological advancements, and strong emphasis on family and community all left their mark on how Americans experience the winter months. From fashion to recreation, from home life to public celebrations, winter in the 1950s was a time that balanced nostalgic ideals with the realities of a rapidly changing society. The legacy of 1950s winters continues to influence American culture today. Many of the images and traditions associated with an old-fashioned winter have their roots in this era. The 1950s approach to winter, with its emphasis on family activities, community engagement, and embracing the season's beauty alongside its challenges, has left a lasting imprint on the American cultural imagination. As we look back on this era, we gain insights into how a society's values and circumstances can shape even the most fundamental of seasonal experiences, reminding us of the complex interplay between nature, culture, and human adaptation.